The cruelest thing a man can do is laugh at love after someone spent years giving it to him. Rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows of Adrian DeLuca's Manhattan penthouse, turning the city lights beyond the glass into blurred rivers of gold and white. Inside, the party glowed with old-money elegance and quiet danger. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above politicians, businessmen, and men whose tailored black suits hid entire worlds behind polite smiles. Soft jazz drifted through the room, while waiters carried trays of champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Adrian stood near the marble fireplace with a glass of bourbon in his hand, surrounded by powerful men pretending they weren't afraid of him. At 38, Adrian DeLuca had the kind of presence that made conversations lower when he entered a room. Tall, sharp-featured, dark hair brushed neatly back from a face carved by discipline instead of kindness. His charcoal suit fit perfectly against broad shoulders built from years of carrying pressure no normal man could survive. But it was his eyes people remembered. Cold gray-blue. The kind that looked through people instead of at them. Senator Holloway laughed too loudly beside him, already halfway drunk. "You know what I don't understand, Adrian?" he said, loosening his tie. "How a guy like you ended up married." A few men chuckled carefully, watching Adrian's reaction before allowing themselves to breathe too freely. Adrian took a slow sip of bourbon. "Neither do I." More laughter followed. Safe laughter. Nervous laughter. The kind people offered powerful men like tribute. Across the room, Evelyn DeLuca stepped out of the elevator carrying a silver tray she'd taken from a startled waiter downstairs after the kitchen became overwhelmed. She moved quietly through the crowd in a midnight blue dress that flowed softly around her legs, elegant without trying too hard. Her blonde hair rested against one shoulder in loose waves, and the diamonds at her throat were small compared to the women around her. Evelyn never dressed to impress anyone in Adrian's world. She had stopped trying years ago. Still, the senator continued, "Your wife seems sweet. Rare these days. She looks like the kind of woman who still believes in love." Adrian smirked faintly, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. "My wife talks like she still believes love means something." The men around him laughed again, louder this time. One muttered, "Jesus," beneath his breath. Adrian barely reacted. To him, it was just another sentence. Another casual cruelty spoken too easily. But then the laughter faded strangely fast. One by one, expressions shifted. Eyes moved behind him. Adrian noticed it immediately. The silence. The discomfort. Slowly, he turned. Evelyn stood only a few feet away holding the silver tray against trembling fingers. Her expression remained calm. Too calm. But Adrian noticed the tiny details because he had spent years studying threats for survival. The slight tightening in her jaw. The way her eyes lost light for half a second. The untouched champagne glasses trembling softly against polished silver. God. She had heard him. Neither of them spoke. Music continued drifting through the penthouse while conversations awkwardly restarted around them. Somewhere near the piano, someone laughed too loudly trying to fix the atmosphere. Adrian opened his mouth, but Evelyn smiled first. Small, polite, controlled. "Your guests are waiting," she said softly. Then she stepped around him with graceful composure and continued through the room like her heart hadn't just been quietly broken in public. Adrian watched her disappear into the crowd, and for the first time that night, the bourbon in his hand tasted bitter. The penthouse felt different after the guests left. Too quiet. Too large. Rain still tapped softly against the windows overlooking Manhattan, but now the sound only made the silence inside feel heavier. Adrian loosened his tie as he walked through the dark hallway toward the kitchen, expecting the familiar warmth of lights left on for him. Evelyn always left one lamp glowing near the stove no matter how late he came home. It had become such a constant part of his life that he barely noticed it anymore. Tonight, the kitchen was dark. Adrian stopped in the doorway, his jaw tightening slightly. Strange. He reached for the switch, and soft golden light filled the room. A plate sat beneath a glass cover on the marble island. Dinner. Still warm. Beside it rested a small espresso cup prepared exactly the way he liked it. No sugar. Never sugar. His eyes lingered on the untouched place sitting across from his. Usually Evelyn waited for him even when midnight stretched into 1 in the morning. She would sit curled in one of the kitchen chairs reading a novel or sketching little designs in the margins of magazines while pretending not to watch the elevator doors every time they opened. Tonight, Her chair was empty. Adrian poured himself a fresh drink instead of touching the espresso. The bourbon burned slightly going down, but not enough. He leaned one hand against the counter and stared out at the city lights below. He should not have cared about one awkward moment at a party. He had survived betrayals worth millions of dollars. Men feared speaking his name too loudly in public. Entire businesses depended on whether Adrian DeLuca approved or destroyed them with a single phone call. And yet somehow the image of Evelyn standing behind him with that silver tray refused to leave his mind. Not angry, not dramatic. That would have been easier. No, she had looked disappointed, quietly disappointed, like someone watching the last light in a room finally burn out. The elevator chimed softly down the hallway. Adrian glanced up instinctively. Evelyn stepped inside the penthouse carrying her heels in one hand. Her makeup had faded slightly after the long evening, but she still looked elegant in that effortless way he never understood. She froze briefly when she saw him standing there. "You are awake," she said gently. Adrian set his glass down. "It is my house." The words came out colder than intended. Evelyn only nodded once and moved toward the refrigerator. She placed leftover flowers from the party into a vase with careful hands. Adrian watched her quietly. Even now she moved through the penthouse like warmth, trying to survive inside stone. "You should have eaten," she said softly without looking at him. "The steak will dry out." Adrian almost laughed at the absurdity. "After? What happened tonight?" She was worried about overcooked steak. "Evelyn." She paused. "What?" He studied her face carefully. "You heard what I said earlier." A long silence stretched between them. Rain whispered against the windows. Somewhere below, a siren echoed through the city streets. Evelyn adjusted one of the white roses in the vase before finally speaking. "People say careless things at parties." Adrian frowned slightly. "That is not an answer." This time she looked at him directly. Her blue eyes looked tired more than hurt, and somehow that unsettled him worse. "You were honest," she said quietly. "I think that is what bothered me." Adrian felt something uncomfortable twist low in his chest. He crossed his arms. "You know how this world works." "Yes," Evelyn whispered. "I do." Then she gave him a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "That is the sad part." She turned toward the hallway, but Adrian spoke before he could stop himself. "Why do you still do all this?" Evelyn looked back. "Do what?" Adrian gestured toward the untouched dinner, the espresso, the flowers she still arranged like the marriage meant something fragile worth protecting. "This." Evelyn stared at him for several seconds before answering. "Because I remember who you were before you decided feeling nothing was strength." Then she disappeared down the hallway, leaving Adrian alone beside two untouched dinners and a cup of cold espresso he suddenly could not bring himself to throw away. The next few days unsettled Adrian in ways he could not explain. Nothing dramatic happened. Evelyn did not scream at him. She did not accuse him of humiliating her in front of half of Manhattan. She simply became quieter, and somehow that silence followed him everywhere. On Thursday morning, Adrian walked into the kitchen at 6:30 expecting the familiar smell of espresso and cinnamon toast Evelyn sometimes made when she could not sleep. Instead, the counters sat spotless and cold beneath the pale sunrise spilling through the windows. A single cup waited beside the coffee machine with a handwritten note in Evelyn's neat script. "Your meeting starts at 8. You should eat something first." Adrian stared at the note longer than necessary. No heart drawn at the bottom. No little smile she used to add without thinking. Just practical words. Efficient. Distant. He folded the note once and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket before realizing how ridiculous that was. Across the city, men twice his size trembled when his name appeared on their phones. Yet somehow one missing smile on a piece of paper managed to irritate him all morning. During lunch at DeLuca Holdings, Adrian sat through 3 hours of negotiations without hearing half the conversation. His executive team discussed shipping contracts and investment expansions while his attention kept drifting toward memories he had not thought about in years. Evelyn laughing on the fire escape of their first apartment in Brooklyn while summer rain soaked both of them. Evelyn falling asleep against his shoulder during late-night drives through the city. Evelyn dancing barefoot in the kitchen one Christmas because the power had gone out and she refused to let silence ruin the evening. He pushed the memories away sharply. Sentiment made people careless. He had built his life surviving men who used emotions as weaknesses to exploit. That was the rule. The only rule that mattered. Yet when Adrian returned home after sunset, He immediately noticed the missing sound of music drifting from the upstairs art room. Evelyn used to spend hours there painting while old jazz records played softly through the penthouse. Tonight, the room was dark. He found her in the library instead, curled into the corner of a velvet sofa with a blanket over her knees and a novel resting unopened in her lap. The fireplace painted warm gold across her pale skin, but her eyes looked far away. Adrian loosened his cufflinks slowly. You stopped painting. Evelyn glanced up briefly. I have not felt inspired lately. Adrian studied her face carefully. You used to paint every day. People change. The answer came gently, but it landed harder than anger would have. Adrian poured himself bourbon from the crystal decanter beside the fireplace. You barely speak to me anymore. Evelyn looked almost surprised by the accusation. You barely noticed me before. Silence settled heavily between them. Fire crackled softly in the background, while traffic lights flickered far below the penthouse windows. Adrian suddenly became aware of every tiny absence surrounding him lately. The missing jazz music, the empty chair at dinner, the fact that Evelyn no longer waited awake for him at night. Even the flowers throughout the penthouse had changed. She used to fill the rooms with white roses because she knew he liked them. Now the vases sat empty. Are you unhappy? The question escaped before Adrian could stop it. Evelyn blinked slowly, like she had not expected him to ask. Then she closed the novel in her lap. I think, she said quietly, I just became tired of loving someone who acts embarrassed by it. Adrian felt the words settle somewhere deep and uncomfortable inside his chest. Evelyn stood carefully, smoothing the blanket from her dress. Good night, Adrian. He watched her disappear upstairs while the fire continued burning beside him. And for the first time in years, Adrian DeLuca realized a terrifying possibility. Evelyn was not fighting for his attention anymore. She was learning how to live without it. Rain hammered against the black SUV as Adrian's convoy moved through lower Manhattan just after midnight. Streetlights reflected across the wet pavement in long streaks of gold, while the city outside blurred into restless shadows. Adrian sat in the back seat scrolling through financial reports on his phone, but he had reread the same paragraph 4 times without absorbing a word. His mind kept returning home, to Evelyn sitting quietly beside the fireplace, to the way she had said tired instead of angry. The driver's voice suddenly broke through the silence. Sir, we may have a problem. Adrian looked up immediately. 2 vehicles appeared in the side mirrors behind them, moving too aggressively for midnight traffic. One accelerated sharply before falling back again. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. Years of survival switched on behind his eyes. Take the tunnel route, he ordered calmly. The SUV turned hard onto a side street. Tires hissed against soaked asphalt. In the front passenger seat, Luca Moretti reached inside his jacket and quietly spoke into an earpiece. The atmosphere inside the vehicle changed in seconds. Controlled, focused, dangerous. Adrian remained perfectly still, but his pulse sharpened beneath his calm exterior. Another vehicle cut across the intersection ahead too quickly. The driver cursed under his breath. Adrian's jaw tightened. Move. The SUV swerved sharply around the corner, just as another car clipped the rear side of the convoy vehicle behind them. Metal screeched somewhere in the rain. Adrian barely reacted outwardly, but Luca turned back immediately. You need to leave the city tonight. Adrian stared through the rain-streaked window. No, sir. I said no. His voice dropped colder. I am not disappearing because somebody wants attention. 20 minutes later, the penthouse elevator opened onto silence. Adrian stepped out first, removing his coat, while 2 security men checked the perimeter automatically. The entire floor smelled faintly of lavender candles and fresh linen. Home. Normal. Safe. Adrian loosened his tie as he walked toward the kitchen, but then he noticed the light. The downstairs guest bathroom glowed softly beneath the hallway arch. Strange. Evelyn never left lights on unnecessarily. Adrian moved quietly toward it. The door stood half open. He pushed it wider and froze. Evelyn sat on the marble floor beside the bathtub wearing one of his oversized sweaters, her blonde hair loosely tied back as she organized a medical kit across a folded towel. Gauze. Alcohol wipes. Bandages. She looked up immediately. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him standing there soaked from rain with tension written across every line of his body. You are hurt. Adrian glanced down. A thin line of blood stained the cuff of his white shirt, where shattered glass from the earlier collision had sliced his forearm without him noticing. "It is nothing." Evelyn stood before he could stop her. "Sit down." Adrian almost refused automatically. Then something in her expression made him obey without argument. He sat on the edge of the bathtub while Evelyn rolled his sleeve upward carefully. Her fingers paused briefly when she saw the deeper cut hidden beneath the fabric. "Adrian, I said it is nothing. And I am saying hold still." The firmness in her voice surprised him. Evelyn soaked a cloth with warm water and gently cleaned the blood from his arm. Adrian watched her silently. Up close, exhaustion shadowed the delicate features of her face. Yet her hands never trembled. Outside, thunder rolled across Manhattan while rain streaked against the windows. The penthouse suddenly felt very far away from politics and power and fear. It was just the two of them beneath soft bathroom lights and the quiet sound of Evelyn breathing. "Did someone try to hurt you?" she asked softly. Adrian's eyes lifted to hers. Most people avoided asking questions about his world. Evelyn never did. She only waited patiently when he chose silence instead of answers. "Occupational hazard," he muttered. Evelyn pressed fresh gauze against the cut. "You joke about dangerous things too often." Adrian almost replied with something cold out of habit. Instead, he found himself watching the careful way she wrapped the bandage around his arm, like protecting him still mattered to her despite everything. "Why do you keep doing this?" he asked quietly. Evelyn looked up. "Doing what?" Adrian held her gaze. "Taking care of me after I give you every reason not to." For a moment Evelyn said nothing. Then she tied off the bandage gently and rested her hand against his wrist. "Because somewhere under all this," she whispered, "there is still a man worth coming home to." Adrian stared at her in stunned silence while thunder shook the skyline outside. And for the first time in years, Adrian DeLuca felt something far more terrifying than fear. He felt seen. Adrian barely slept after that night. He lay awake beside Evelyn listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing while Manhattan glowed cold and restless beyond the bedroom windows. The bandage on his arm tightened every time he flexed his hand, but it was not the cut bothering him. It was her words. Somewhere under all this, there is still a man worth coming home to. Nobody had spoken to Adrian like that in years. Not with honesty. Not without fear. By 7 in the morning he was already dressed for work, standing alone in the kitchen while the espresso machine hummed softly. Usually Evelyn came downstairs sometime after him wearing oversized sweaters and sleepy eyes, asking whether he remembered to eat breakfast before disappearing into the art room upstairs. Today she never appeared. Adrian glanced toward the staircase twice before grabbing his coat with visible irritation. "Sir?" Luca asked carefully near the elevator. Adrian frowned. "What?" Luca hesitated. "You have been staring at the stairs for 5 minutes." Adrian shot him a cold look. "Do not start psychoanalyzing me, Luca." The older man hid a smile immediately. "Of course, sir." But even during meetings downtown, Adrian remained distracted. Twice he picked up his phone without realizing it. Once to check whether Evelyn had texted him. She had not. By late afternoon, rain began falling again across the city. Adrian stood inside his office overlooking the Hudson River while thunder rolled between skyscrapers. Something restless sat beneath his skin all day, an unfamiliar pressure he could not shake. At 6:30, he canceled dinner with investors and returned home early for the first time in months. The penthouse elevator opened onto soft piano music drifting faintly through the hallway. Adrian stopped immediately. Evelyn had not played piano in almost a year. He followed the sound quietly until he reached the living room. Evelyn sat alone at the black grand piano near the windows, candlelight flickering across her pale skin while rain slid down the glass behind her. She wore a cream-colored sweater and loose silk pants, her blonde hair falling softly over one shoulder as her fingers moved slowly across the keys. Adrian stood there longer than he intended, just watching her. There was something painfully beautiful about the loneliness in the room. Like she had built herself a quiet little world because he stopped entering hers a long time ago. The music ended softly. Evelyn finally noticed him standing there. Her hands stilled on the piano keys. "You are home early." Adrian loosened his tie slightly. "Apparently." Evelyn gave a faint smile before looking back toward the rain. "Outside. Dinner is in the oven." Adrian remained where he was. "Sit with me." The request surprised both of them. Evelyn turned slowly on the piano bench. Adrian almost never asked for company. For a second, she looked uncertain whether he actually meant it. Then she closed the piano lid gently and walked toward the kitchen seating area. The penthouse lights glowed warm against the storm outside, while they sat across from each other with untouched plates between them. Adrian watched Evelyn carefully as she stirred tea instead of eating. "You barely sleep anymore," he said quietly. Evelyn looked up in mild surprise. "You noticed?" The question stung more than it should have. Adrian leaned back slowly. "You think I do not notice anything about you?" Evelyn held his gaze for several seconds before answering. "I think you trained yourself not to." Silence stretched between them again. But this silence felt different from the others. Less cold, more fragile. Adrian looked down at the steam rising from his untouched espresso. "Why are you still here, Evelyn?" Her fingers tightened slightly around the teacup. Adrian continued before she could answer. "You could have left years ago. You are beautiful, smart, kind. You could have had a simpler life with someone normal." Evelyn smiled sadly. "You think love is supposed to be convenient." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I think people leave when things become difficult." "Some people do," she whispered. "But loving someone is not about staying only when they are easy to love." Adrian looked at her carefully. The candles flickered softly between them while rain whispered against the window's 70 floors above Manhattan. Evelyn lowered her eyes to the tea in her hands. "I stayed because I kept believing there was still goodness in you even after you stopped believing it yourself." Adrian felt something shift painfully inside his chest. For the first time in years, nobody in the room expected anything from Adrian DeLuca except honesty. And somehow that terrified him far more than danger ever had. 3 days later, Adrian found the passport by accident. He had come home early again after canceling another meeting nobody else in Manhattan would have dared refuse. The penthouse felt unusually quiet except for the distant sound of rain tapping against the windows. Evelyn had gone downstairs to meet a florist about arrangements for a charity event she still managed despite slowly disappearing from everything else in her life. Adrian loosened his watch while walking toward the bedroom, stopping briefly when he noticed one of the closet drawers slightly open. Normally, he would not have cared, but lately every small thing about Evelyn pulled at his attention like a loose thread unraveling faster than he could catch it. He crossed the room and pushed the drawer closed automatically. Then he froze. Inside sat a leather travel folder he had never seen before. Adrian frowned slightly and pulled it free. His heartbeat slowed in a way that always happened before bad news. Inside the folder rested a passport. Evelyn Hart. Her maiden name. Issued 8 months ago. Beneath it sat a plane ticket confirmation for Florence, Italy dated 6 months earlier. One way. Adrian stared at the paper for several long seconds. There was also an apartment lease application. Bank documents. Enough money transferred quietly over time to start a new life, comfortably somewhere far away from New York and far away from him. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Not because she planned it. Because she never left. Adrian sat slowly at the edge of the bed with the documents still in his hands while late afternoon sunlight faded gray behind storm clouds outside. 6 months ago. Evelyn had been preparing to leave him 6 months ago. His eyes drifted toward the nightstand beside her side of the bed. A framed photo sat there from years earlier. Brooklyn. Summer. Both of them younger and smiling like the world had not hardened yet. Adrian remembered that version of himself vaguely now. Before power became survival. Before every conversation turned strategic. Before he started treating tenderness like weakness. The front door opened quietly downstairs. Adrian heard Evelyn's soft footsteps crossing the marble floors below. For the first time in years, panic moved through him slowly and unfamiliar beneath the surface of his calm exterior. Not fear for his empire. Fear for something smaller and infinitely more fragile. Her. Evelyn entered the bedroom carrying white roses wrapped in brown paper. She stopped immediately when she saw the documents in Adrian's hands. Silence filled the room. Adrian stood slowly. "You were leaving." Evelyn looked at the passport for only a second before setting the flowers down carefully on the dresser. "I almost did." Adrian's jaw tightened hard enough to ache. "Why did you stay?" Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself lightly, like she suddenly felt cold. "I kept waiting." "For what?" Her eyes lifted to his. Soft blue. Exhausted. Honest. "For you to come back to yourself." The words hit Adrian harder than anger ever could have. He looked down at the plane ticket again. "You planned everything." "Yes." "You had another life ready." Evelyn nodded once. "I needed to know I could survive without you if I had to." Adrian swallowed slowly. Something heavy settled in his chest at the realization. She had not stayed because she was trapped. Not because she feared him. Not because she lacked choices. Evelyn stayed because she loved him long after loving him became painful. Adrian stared at the passport in silence before asking the question quietly. Why did you not go? Evelyn looked toward the rain-covered skyline beyond the windows. Because every time I tried to leave, I remembered the man who used to bring me coffee at 2 in the morning while I painted. Her voice softened further. The man who kissed my forehead before meetings because he thought I was still asleep. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. Memories surfaced with painful clarity. Small moments he forgot. Small kindnesses Evelyn apparently never did. I kept thinking, she whispered. If that version of you still existed somewhere under all this, maybe one day he would find his way back to me. Adrian looked at the woman standing in front of him and felt shame crawl slowly beneath his skin for the first time in years. Not because she almost left. Because she had stayed long enough to lose hope instead. The argument started over something small. It always did. Rain pressed softly against the penthouse windows while Manhattan disappeared beneath low clouds and silver light. Adrian stood near the kitchen island reading messages on his phone, his expression sharpening colder with every passing second. Across the room, Evelyn arranged fresh flowers into a crystal vase with careful hands, pretending not to notice the tension gathering around him like static before a storm. You canceled dinner again tomorrow night, she said quietly without looking up. Adrian barely glanced away from the screen. I have work. Evelyn gave a faint nod. You always have work. Normally Adrian would have ignored the comment completely, but exhaustion had been building inside him for days. Sleepless nights. Endless pressure. The unsettling realization that his wife had almost disappeared from his life without him even noticing soon enough. You think this empire runs itself? He asked sharply. Evelyn adjusted another white rose into place. No, I think you hide inside it. Adrian's eyes lifted immediately. Excuse me. For the first time in weeks, something flickered in Evelyn's expression. Not anger. Sadness. Every time something real gets close to you, you bury yourself in business, meetings, control. Anything except people. Adrian laughed once under his breath, humorless and cold. That is easy to say when you have never carried responsibility for anyone. The second the words left his mouth, silence crashed into the room. Evelyn's hands stopped moving completely. Adrian saw it instantly. The hurt. Quiet, but devastating. She slowly set the flower down and looked at him carefully. I carried you for years, Adrian. His jaw tightened. That is not what I meant. No, she whispered. It is exactly what you meant. The rain outside intensified softly against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over the city skyline. Adrian dragged one hand through his dark hair in frustration. I am trying here, Evelyn. Trying what? She asked gently. To notice me now that I finally stopped asking you to? Adrian stepped toward her. That is unfair. Evelyn stared at him for several long seconds before giving a tired smile that nearly broke something inside him. You know what the worst part is? She asked quietly. I never needed perfection from you. Adrian said nothing. I just needed to feel like loving me was not some embarrassing weakness you tolerated in private. Her voice never rose. That somehow made every word hurt more. Adrian looked away first. The city lights reflected dimly across the marble floor while silence filled the enormous penthouse between them. Finally, Evelyn reached toward her left hand slowly. Adrian frowned slightly before realization hit him all at once. Her wedding ring. She slid it free carefully and placed it beside the vase of white roses. The sound against marble was painfully soft. Adrian stared at the ring like he did not understand what he was seeing. Evelyn. She shook her head gently. I am tired, Adrian. Panic moved through him instantly beneath the surface calm he spent years perfecting. Do not do this. Evelyn's eyes shimmered faintly, but no tears fell. I stayed because I loved you. She swallowed slowly. But I cannot keep disappearing just to make your life easier. Adrian stepped forward again. You are overreacting. The second he said it, he knew he chose the wrong words. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly like something inside her finally gave out. That right there, she whispered. That is why I cannot breathe here anymore. Adrian felt the room suddenly becoming too quiet. Too empty. Where are you going? Evelyn picked up her coat from the chair beside the kitchen. Somewhere I can remember who I was before loving you started hurting. Adrian stared at her in stunned silence while she walked toward the elevator. No screaming. No shattered glass. No dramatic goodbye. Just the soft sound of heels against marble and the woman he loved quietly walking out of his life. The elevator doors opened. Evelyn paused only once before stepping inside. "I hope one day," she said softly, "you learn that being loved was never the weakness." Then the doors closed. Adrian stood motionless beside the untouched flowers and the wedding ring she left behind, while rain swallowed Manhattan whole outside the windows. And for the first time in his entire life, Adrian DeLuca understood what helplessness felt like. The penthouse no longer felt like home after Evelyn left. It felt like a museum built for a man who had mistaken emptiness for power. 3 days passed before Adrian realized he had not turned on the television once. 5 before he noticed the flowers near the kitchen had started dying because nobody changed the water anymore. A full week before he finally understood the unbearable truth. Evelyn had been the warmth inside every room, and without her the silence became impossible to ignore. Adrian stopped sleeping properly. Some nights he sat alone in the dark kitchen until sunrise with untouched bourbon beside him and Evelyn's wedding ring resting near his hand like an accusation he could not escape. Other nights he wandered through the penthouse without purpose, pausing in doorways like he expected to find her somewhere inside the life she used to fill so effortlessly. The art room upstairs remained exactly how she left it. Half-finished canvases leaned against the walls beneath soft afternoon light. Paintbrushes rested inside cloudy jars of water that had long since gone still. Adrian stood there for almost an hour one evening staring at a painting she never completed. Manhattan at sunset. Gold light across the river. 2 blurry figures standing together near the edge of a rooftop. Him and her. Even unfinished, the painting felt painfully hopeful. Luca found him there eventually. "You missed 2 meetings today." Adrian did not turn around. "Reschedule them." Luca hesitated carefully. "You have been rescheduling everything." Adrian finally looked at him. His eyes appeared darker lately, exhausted in ways sleep could not fix. "Did you know she almost left me 6 months ago?" Luca remained silent. That was answer enough. Adrian laughed once under his breath, bitter and hollow. "Everybody knew except me." Luca stepped closer slowly. "With respect, sir, she spent years trying to be seen by you." The words landed quietly but hard. Adrian looked away again toward the unfinished painting. "I thought giving her safety was enough." "Women like Evelyn do not stay for safety," Luca said softly. "They stay for love." After he left, Adrian remained alone in the art room until night swallowed the skyline outside. Finally, he crossed toward Evelyn's desk near the windows. Sketchbooks rested in neat piles beside jars of charcoal pencils and folded letters tied carefully with white ribbon. Adrian hesitated before touching them. Then slowly he untied the ribbon. Inside were years of small things he never noticed. Handwritten notes, ticket stubs from their first dates, printed photographs, birthday cards, tiny memories Evelyn had saved while Adrian spent years acting like survival mattered more than tenderness. One folded piece of paper slipped loose into his lap. Adrian recognized his own handwriting immediately. "Happy anniversary, Ev. I know I forget things sometimes, but I never forget you. Love you always." Adrian closed his eyes sharply. He barely remembered writing it. But Evelyn kept it for 7 years. 7. His throat tightened painfully. Another letter caught his attention. This one written by Evelyn. Never given to him. Adrian unfolded it carefully. "Adrian, I miss you even when you are standing next to me. I think that is the loneliest feeling in the world. But somehow I still love you enough to wait a little longer. I just hope one day you realize I was never asking for perfection. I was only asking for you." Adrian stared at the words while something inside him finally cracked open completely. He lowered the letter slowly and covered his eyes with one hand. For years Adrian DeLuca believed power meant never needing anyone, never depending, never softening. But now he sat alone in a dark room holding proof that somebody had loved him patiently while he slowly became impossible to reach. Outside the windows, snow began falling softly across Manhattan for the first time that winter. Adrian looked toward the skyline through blurred vision and whispered something he had not said in years because he never allowed himself to need it. "Come home." But the penthouse remained silent. Adrian found Evelyn exactly where he should have looked first. The beach house in Montauk. Small, quiet, hidden from the world he built around himself. Snow covered the empty shoreline in soft white silence while gray waves rolled endlessly beneath the winter sky. Adrian stood outside the house for almost a full minute with freezing wind cutting through his black wool coat, staring at the warm light glowing behind the windows. His pulse had not settled once during the entire 3-hour drive from Manhattan. Not after finding the old address inside one of Evelyn's sketchbooks. Not after realizing every memory she treasured somehow led back to this place. He walked toward the porch slowly. No security. No driver. No men waiting nearby. Just Adrian DeLuca alone for the first time in years. Inside, Evelyn sat curled beneath a blanket near the fireplace with a book resting forgotten in her lap. Soft jazz played quietly from an old radio while snow drifted beyond the windows behind her. She looked peaceful in a way Adrian had not seen in a very long time. Then she noticed him standing at the door. Her expression shifted instantly from calm to stunned disbelief. Adrian suddenly forgot every prepared sentence during the drive. Evelyn stood slowly. "How did you find me?" Adrian swallowed once before answering honestly. "I finally started paying attention." Silence stretched softly between them while the fire crackled nearby. Evelyn looked smaller somehow, standing there wrapped in cream-colored wool and firelight instead of marble and penthouses. More real. More human. Adrian realized with painful clarity that he had spent years treating her like something permanent instead of precious. Evelyn crossed her arms lightly. "You should not be here." Adrian nodded once. "Probably." She waited. Adrian looked around the tiny beach house quietly. Paintings leaned against the walls. Candles glowed softly on the kitchen counter. A mug of tea rested near the fireplace beside an unfinished sketchbook. It felt warm. Lived in. Like Evelyn had finally built a place where she could breathe again. "You look happier," Adrian admitted softly. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. "I am quieter." The answer hurt because he understood the difference now. Adrian stepped farther inside slowly, snow melting from his shoes onto the wooden floorboards. "I read the letters." Evelyn froze. "You were not supposed to." "I know." His voice roughened. "Slightly. But I am glad I did." Evelyn stared at him carefully, like she no longer trusted herself to hope too easily. Adrian reached into his coat pocket slowly and pulled out her wedding ring. The gold glimmered softly against his palm beneath the firelight. "I carried this around for 2 weeks," he whispered. "I could not put it down." Evelyn's eyes softened painfully at the sight of it. Adrian looked at the ring for a moment before lifting his gaze back to hers. "I spent years thinking strength meant needing nothing." His throat tightened slightly. "But the truth is, I built an empire because I did not know how to let people close enough to hurt me." Evelyn remained silent. Adrian took another step closer carefully. "Then you loved me anyway." The wind rattled softly against the windows while firelight flickered across Evelyn's face. Adrian looked exhausted now. Not physically. Soul-deep exhausted. Like a man finally honest enough to see the damage he caused. "I do not know how to do this perfectly," he admitted quietly. "I do not know how to undo years of becoming someone cold." His voice dropped lower. Vulnerable in a way Adrian DeLuca never allowed anyone to witness. "But I know I cannot lose you." Evelyn's eyes shimmered faintly as she stared at him. Adrian stepped close enough now to gently place the wedding ring onto the table between them instead of forcing it into her hand. "You were right," he whispered. "Being loved was never the weakness. I was just too afraid to deserve it." Silence filled the little beach house again. But this silence felt warm instead of empty. Slowly Evelyn reached forward and touched the side of Adrian's face gently with trembling fingers. Adrian closed his eyes for half a second like the softness nearly destroyed him. She did not say she forgave him. Not yet. Some wounds healed slowly. Some trust returned quietly, one honest moment at a time. But she did not step away either. Outside, snow continued falling softly across the shoreline while waves rolled endlessly against the winter coast. And for the first time in years, Adrian DeLuca stood before someone without power, without armor, without fear of being seen. Just a man. Finally learning that love was never asking him to become perfect. It was only asking him to stay human.